One last battle to hold the line against the night.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
Hold the line. No one gets through, no matter what.
Sir, what are your orders?
There's only one order, Lieutenant. Behold.
Incoming transmission.
Allied reinforcements have arrived from the west.
HollowNet on Mojo 50 Radio. The millennial conservative resistance begins right here, right now.
Millennial conservative resistance does indeed begin right here, right now with you. You are listening to and hopefully watching the HollowNet on the mighty Mojo 50. And joining me today in studio, we have 3 times the Holloway that you would typically encounter during this hour. I have my father, Leslie Holloway, and I have my brother, Leslie Holloway. Yes, that does get a little bit confusing, but we'll muddle through. I think I'll just refer to my dad as Dad just for the sake of simplicity, and my brother is Les. But they have flown here all the way from beautiful Richmond, Virginia, thereabouts, to the blasted, irradiated wilderness that is Phoenix, Arizona, just to visit the family. And I thought, what better hospitality can I show them than having them join me for this week's episode of the HollowNet, just to review the absolute and utter shit show that has been going on for the past week, ranging from President Trump's will he, won't he attack Iran, the latest news from the left coast of California pertaining to your inability to deconstruct your own vehicle in your garage. So that project truck that you just purchased, you might want to reconsider. Among several other things, we're going to shoot across the pond to talk about the race for Prime Minister, which has now been narrowed down to 2 candidates. So, Dad, Les, welcome to the show. How you guys doing?
The HollowNet.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Now, this is just absolutely trippy as hell for me, and I know probably for you a little bit as well. I actually haven't, sat physically in the same place as my brother in 13 years. So it's been a good long time. That was 2006 last time I actually laid eyes on the young man in person. Fairly sure that was like at a hotel in North Jersey, wasn't it then?
Yes, it was.
And been a long time coming to get the band back together. And one of the reasons that I thought you might have a good time coming on is I know that I get a lot of my political makeup and a lot of the opinions that I've formed over the years from my dad, because my dad is a original intent constitutionalist. And Dad, can you go into a little bit of detail about your constitutionalist inclinations?
Well, first off, you're not going to blame that on me, okay? Second, my leanings come from growing up as a long-haired progressive liberal who, like most other people, when they're young, you start off as a progressive liberal. When you're, when you raise a family, you turn into a rock rib conservative for the most part. And later on in life, you start being able to whittle down what your real core beliefs are. And, I really do think that with just a few exceptions, the way the Constitution was written, not the way it's quote unquote interpreted by many of the power elites, is really my core belief on how this country should be run.
Well, I think I definitely get a bit of my opinion there from you. One of the things we're actually going to talk about today, which I can pull up, go picture in picture. You might have to flip through a couple of tabs, Dad. I got Dad set up on the iPad there so they can follow along as well. There's actually a recent bill that's been proposed in the Senate by Senator Hawley, which is a modification of the Communications Decency Act. And I know that he's getting raked over the coals right now, especially by people like Reason and National Review, that it is a badly thought out bill And what this bill would basically do is it would inject the federal government directly into controlling social media like Facebook and Twitter by creating a government panel to determine if they receive the safe harbor protections from Congress of a platform or if they be treated under the law as a publisher. The dividing line is that they have to safeguard the freedom of political speech in a neutral and non-biased way, and of course the arbiters of that neutrality would be the federal government.
See, I really disagree with the premise, because look at the FCC. Okay, the FCC had the fairness doctrine. The FCC has, dictatorial rule over how information gets shared, and part of that is where we get the media as it stands today. So we have a mainstream media that's wholly biased. We have now a conservative media that even though we don't have very many outlets, it's still being on the rise, but it's far overshadowed by the parroting, and I just can't believe that people would want to have the government in charge of anything, to tell you the truth. I mean, really, the only thing that the government was really made to do is to provide for the common, defense, and to, keep infrastructures and, a way of life going.
So what are your thoughts on this, Les? I mean, looking at the responsibility of the federal government now being expanded to include being the arbiter of what is fair on social media or not, to prevent like the deplatforming of Steven Crowder or of far-right sources that are deemed to be politically incorrect, like your Milo Yiannopoulos, like your Richard Spencer, if you want to go off to the like actual full-blown neo-Nazi level. Do you believe that the federal government should have a place in administrating that kind of regulation?
Well, I'm pretty green to all of this, like, political stuff, but I don't think the government should have any kind of say in what people want to project onto whatever kind of platform. If somebody has something to say and wants to let it be known, that should be allowed.
The question is, should the platform be able to throttle that or put a muzzle on that if they don't like the content? That's the question.
Well, I feel like that's up to the admins and the creators of the platform, right? To be able to hold whatever they want and to project their kind of not really project what they believe, but to keep what they think is unsafe or misleading ideas out of their users. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, the problem that you have with that is,
but I don't think the government should be involved. I feel like that's a owner specific thing.
well, now let's circle back to actually Facebook and and Google. Okay, they were started as a platform, as an architecture, with no
Well, they had very little restrictions on their terms of use,
Yes,
but
yeah.
it was pretty much limited to what's illegal is what you can't put on.
Right.
Yeah.
But now, they are truly becoming publishers
Because
they're taking
moderating the
editorial.
content. Yeah.
They're taking editorial stance. If you're taking an editorial stance, you are no longer a platform.
Well, that's what this bill is seeking to do. It's seeking to create a committee or a board that would arbitrate whether or not Google or Facebook or Twitter has crossed that Rubicon and shifted from being a platform to being a publisher. Because the question is, how do you accomplish that? Now, my thought process would be the typical governmental process would be in the courts.
Yes.
Where a court would decide that you are now in violation of, the Decency Act, because you're no longer meeting the criteria of Section 203, which says that you have to be a platform, not a publisher.
Right.
And I think that would be best left with the courts. I don't believe that we should be seeing Congress form an independent body, again, like the FCC, which can be co-opted and politicized, but this should be held in the traditional respect in the courts. And I think the best solution possible to this is actually what a lot of small companies are doing right now, like MeWe, like Gab, like Minds.com, like Telegraph.com. And there are numerous other platforms out there, and HollowNet's on all of them. I think the only one I haven't gotten on yet is Telegraph. But there are these alternative platforms that, it's being called the alt social media, which kind of leaves people with a bad taste in their mouth because they automatically pair that with the alt-right. But the real birth and genesis behind it is preservation of the freedom of speech and a counterpoint against the more leftist progressive leanings of Silicon Valley. And I think it's the marketplace that's going to decide. And speaking of the marketplace deciding, you actually have the ability to decide where your money wants to go. Cell phone companies like T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, AT&T, they actually don't follow your beliefs. They really don't. They've been donating to systems like Planned Parenthood, like Unidos US, for decades. And now the media bias is at an all-time high. Anti-Semitism is starting to pick up. You don't have to shop at liberal cell phone companies that fund liberal agendas that take away from your freedom. You can support your values with veteran-led Patriot Mobile, America's only conservative cell phone company providing reliable nationwide coverage. It's easy to switch. You keep your same phone number, bring your own device, or buy a new one. Enjoy no hidden fees, no roaming, no liberal agenda. At Patriot Mobile, more than $2 million has been used to support your constitutional rights. Imagine what they can do with you on their side when you switch to Patriot Mobile. With unlimited talk and text plans starting as low as $25 a month, don't wait. Visit patriotmobile.com/mojo50 and join us to stop the left and switch to Patriot Mobile today. We need you now more than ever. That's on patriotmobile.com/mojo50.
Ooh, that was smooth.
Yeah, like a native. I mean, just got to slide right into that spot. Yeah. And that's how we do things on Mojo 50, because the original Mojo 50 was actually the brainchild of a guy by the name of Doc Thompson. Dad, you used to listen to Doc when he was in Virginia.
Yes, I did. I actually called into his program a few times.
Yeah, I actually had the privilege of speaking to him on a couple of occasions, exchanging some emails. He was actually a rather big influence on me getting my own podcast started. And I'm pretty sure I told you he very tragically passed away this past year.
Yeah, I heard.
He was actually hit by an Amtrak train just outside Mojo 50 Studios while he was out jogging. And, the crazy thing is that Doc Thompson set all of this up at Mojo 50 to approach radio in a different way. We actually don't do these great big advertising blocks like you hear on like Salem Communications or like the other big talk radio stations where you just tune out because, oh my God, it's now another straight 6 minutes of ads. No, we just do live reads that we work right into the show, and that's the way we do it.
Oh no, not Viagra and car dealerships.
And don't forget to get your catheters, because Fox News is only appealing to people that are 60 plus now. And that's the way it works. Yeah, I want to hear about that.
I like that.
So, we touched on that, Bill, and the reason that I actually thought of this is I heard a show by Sargon of Akkad. He had one of his compatriots on, I think it was Ark Roman or something like that, and it really portrays the difference between what a traditional British liberal mindset is, which is, John Locke, which is Enlightenment thinking, which I agree with Sargon of Akkad and with Mark Meekum, Count Dankula, a lot. These are very freedom-minded people. They're fighting for freedom of expression and freedom of speech in a country where it doesn't exist. Because for anybody out there that thinks that the Brits have freedom of speech, they don't. The government can beat down your door for teaching your girlfriend's pug how to do a Nazi salute.
Ooh, I heard about that.
Yeah, Dankula literally got thrown in jail for that. That's a thing that happened. And he actually got fined £800 when he refused to pay it because he was trying to be a badass and said, I'm not going to pay it. They just took it straight out of his account. You don't have protection against unlawful seizure in the UK. The government says, oh no, you owe us that money.
You have to understand.
Gone.
You have to understand that Britain is still a royal sovereign. Okay, they are not. They are a a kingship. I mean, you still have, it's parliamentary.
So the parliament says goes, period. There is no codified constitution, and that's one of the reasons why it's so crucial that my generation, that Dad's generation, your generation especially, develop a deep appreciation for this document before it gets snatched away from us one piece at a time.
And you asked me before about why I was an original intent constitutionalist. I mean, when you think about the freedoms that we actually do have, and they're slowly being stripped away by the likes of, all of the senators and congressmen that have been in these quote-unquote institutions for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. I mean, and one of the things that kills me about that is when our government was formed, it was a part-time job where they got per diems. And now we got guys going in there like Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders and all these people that are going in paupers in a government job.
Sorry, I had to make sure that I played my welcome for Bernie Sanders on there, the good old SOB quote. But yeah, I had to. But along that line, I mean, this is not in the show notes, and I'll drop a link in a little bit. Steven Crowder actually had Ted Cruz on his show just yesterday, just Thursday, because we're pre-recording on Friday night, and damnedest thing happened. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually put a tweet out there that she wanted to propose a bill that would forbid congressmen and women from becoming lobbyists after their tenure in Congress. That would forbid this entirely. And Ted Cruz, after he picked his jaw up off the floor, said, shit, yeah, let's do it. We'll work together on it.
Mine just fell on the floor because I didn't hear it.
Gets better. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which proves that even a busted watch can be right twice a day, after this, tweets out, get this, I'm in favor of term limits in Congress. Ted Cruz went, tweeted her again, okay, let's do it. Wow. So now you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the darling of the progressive left, someone who was put up there by Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks, now getting on the same page as Ted Cruz, the most hated man in Washington, D.C. today. When I was a kid, we used to watch the WWE, and we used to talk about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the most electrifying man in sports entertainment today, the people's champion, the Brahma Bull. And now we talk about
If you smell
what The Rock is cooking. And now we talk about the most hated man in Washington, D.C., the cruise missile, the Eddie Munster lookalike himself, Senator Ted Cruz, getting on the same page as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. My stars and garters I never thought I would see today.
Is he the one that people think is a Zodiac killer?
He is the one that Donald Trump, the president, actually said, I think he might be the Zodiac killer. and this is a thing that actually happened. And then,
he's the Zodiac killer right now.
Well, you see, when you want to do your Donald Trump, you have to kind of get a little more nasally, and you have to say how it's always the best things that you have, the best, the biggest, bigly, hugely big.
I'm so big, I'm big. Look at me big.
I've got big hands, I've got great hands, normal-sized hands. Anyway, but yeah, so totally off the rails. Conversation goes a different direction you don't expect sometimes, and that's the great thing about actually having live in studio guests, because your show notes just go out the friggin' window. But speaking of the Trumpster, the orange one himself, taking a look at an article from The Blaze, this is pretty interesting, actually. This is just a staff story that came up. President Donald Trump confirmed in a tweet on Friday that he called off a retaliatory attack against Iran, quote, 10 minutes before the strike, because it would not have been, quote, proportionate to kill 150 people for the downing of an unmanned U.S. drone. They said, on Monday they shot down an unmanned drone flying in international waters. He tweeted Friday morning, when we were cocked and loaded to retaliate last night on 3 different sites when I asked how many people will die. 150 people, sir, was the answer from the general. 10 minutes before the strike, I stopped it, not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. And now the president is getting excoriated by the left for not pulling the trigger. And this is one of those moments where I go, okay, I get it. You don't like the guy. You know, I'm not a Trump cheerleader. When he does something stupid, I call him out for doing something stupid. Like now he's got accusations that he raped a notable New York columnist in a dressing room 20 years ago, which with those things I kind of side-eye usually because it's like, oh, well, he's president now, so now this comes out. You know, I want to believe the victim, but sometimes it's difficult and you have to apply a critical eye to these things. But, you know, I'll be the first one to say, President Trump is an asshole.
Yeah.
It's not illegal to be asshole yet.
I grew up in New Jersey and New York, okay, and grew up at the time when, you know, he was young Donald Trump, okay?
The
Donald. And
before he had the worst comb-over in history.
Well, before he had the worst comb-over in history.
I mean, he always looked greasy.
You know, and for me being in the construction trades most of my life, I mean, you knew when you worked in New York how it was. I mean, and that's not to say that he either invented that way or that he just had to work within that realm. And now he's having to work within the realm of the quote-unquote swamp. You know, and it's so funny because he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't. And you got, I saw an interesting piece, and I forget who did it, sorry about that, but it was last night before I fell asleep, and it was unbelievable in the fact that first off, when he asked the general what the collateral damage would be, the general had to say, "I'll get back to you,"
because they hadn't computed the collateral damage yet at that point.
So that blows your mind. First off,
isn't that the first thing you check?
That should be. And now
how many people are going to die when we bomb this place? Isn't that the first thing you look at?
What impresses me was that was the first thing that came out of the Donald's mouth.
Is what's the collateral damage? What's the blowback? Because he wants to know, because he knows that's going to be the cross he's nailed to.
Whatever happened to common sense?
It doesn't exist in D.C.
I don't like that.
No.
Okay, common sense is as uncommon as a $3 bill.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's not just in D.C. I mean,
really?
So get this. I mean, you go back to the Ayatollah Assahola days. 1979. You lived through that when they took over our embassy and captured all those college students. And Carter had a pretty miserable time getting through it. But I think that's another case where it was a mediocre man when times called for a great one, and he did the best he could. But from the Daily Mail, I like pulling UK news because they tend to be somewhat dispassionate about American politics. Although they have their own left and right slant, it's not as overwhelming usually. But Daily Mail says, Iran is now stating they refrained from shooting down a U.S. spy plane with 35 people on board, which was flying alongside the downed drone, as the leader of prayers in Tehran warned that the Strait of Hormuz will become a graveyard for any aggressor. So, according to the story from the Daily Mail, prominent clerics and political figures in Iran are now claiming the entire Strait of Hormuz, which for the geographically disinclined lies in between Iran and I believe Dubai, if I'm not mistaken. So it is the port of entry. It is the entry into the Persian Gulf. A third of the world's oil flows through this strait. And they're now claiming that strait as their sovereign territory. So that's where their assertion that the drone was flying through their airspace comes from. It was flying in international waters in the Strait of Hormuz, but they reject the treaties that they themselves were parties to signing, the UN laws of the sea, that state the Strait of Hormuz is international waters.
The thing that you have to remember about the Middle East and about China even is that they have a really long history, okay? And that really long history is of warlords, mullahs, different other factions, all fighting against each other. So, when it comes to those boundaries and borders, they're used to them being static and not fixed.
Humans are territorial creatures.
And you know, they talk about it all the time that the nomadic tribes, the Bedouin, things of that nature, they thought nothing of territorial boundaries. Okay, so I mean that in a lot of those areas, we're still in the 4th century, even though they've got, you know, Rolls, Bentleys in my box to drive around in instead of riding on camels. You know, you're talking about people that ideologically and philosophically have not come out of the 4th century.
We're going to come back to that. We have to actually take a 2-minute break. I think this is the first time I've actually overrun the bottom of the hour. But that just goes to show when you're having fun. So, we'll be right back with more HollowNet. 3 times the HollowNet. My brother. Back in 2 minutes. Stick around.
1952.
Really?
Jesus.
Earthy tones.
Oh, man. Putting too much work on my
You're listening to the HollowNet on Mojo 50 Radio. The Millennial Conservative Resistance begins right here, right now.
My brother lets me HollowNet. By the way, sorry about you taking the bullet straight in the face that I managed to dodge, because I'm pretty sure he wanted to name me Leslie Clarence Holloway III, and my mom said, hell no.
I like it. It made me strong.
Hey, man, there's no worries about that.
My kid's gonna be Leslie, so he knows my pain.
Well, the name Leslie Clarence Holloway has been in the Holloway family for 300 years.
Did you know amongst our listenership are actually some of the Holloway cousins in St. John's, Newfoundland,
Hi, St. John's, Newfoundland.
and also off of Holloway Cove, which is a actual landmark that I would love to see someday. I think we should all go together as a family. It's actually located right outside of Musgrave Town, which is where our great-great-grandfather settled the family.
Can I kiss him?
You can swim in it, and you probably freeze your balls off. Just
The Holloway family property was blown off of the island by a hurricane.
Yes, I was once upon a time like deeply into genealogical research, and I did some digging, and our family had property on, oh God, what was it, Redfin Island or something like that? No, Red Cliff Island. Red Cliff Island, Newfoundland. Our family had a great big property, a great big farm, and fishing lots and all that, and because most people in Newfoundland at that time were cod fishermen. So this island got hit by a hurricane. This tiny little island, it's like a mile, got bullseyed 6 times in 20 years.
6 times.
And this is like in like the mid to late 1800s. So our family just bugged out and said, shit, we're not dealing with this anymore. And they actually went to what is considered, mainland Newfoundland, which is just a much bigger island. And then eventually Pop, as I call him, Pop Clarence, decided to leave Newfoundland because there was evidently nothing more to do there for him. And by a very, very interesting turn, you and I actually missed being dual citizens by about 5 years.
Oh.
Yeah. And actually, my father, during that time, could have qualified for triple citizenship because our grandfather was a British subject, because at the time he was born, Newfoundland was a dominion of Britain, not of Canada.
You did this.
So he started out as a British subject, and then when Canada subsumed Newfoundland, he became a Canadian citizen and a British subject at the same time, and then he moved to the United States, signed up for a Social Security card, but failed to disavow his previous citizenships. So at one point, Dad could have claimed to have been a citizen of Britain, Canada, and the United States simultaneously.
Yeah, but then they would have taxed me from all 3 of them things. So.
Luckily, the law changed in 2006 and slammed the door shut on all that. Because crazy thing about British and Canadian law, you can actually claim citizenship through grandparentage. Up until 2006, you could do that. So that was pretty insane. But I digress, because that has absolutely nothing to do with anything for the purposes of this show. I mentioned before going off the rails. Speaking of that, I completely missed my damn live read for that bottom half there. So we're going to jump into that real fast. Going to tell you about our buddies over at Spoony Radio. Spoony channel is all about food and fun, having fun with food and vice versa. If you can eat it or you can have fun with it, they're going to be talking about it. Spoony is a one-of-a-kind 24/7 food talk radio channel. If you like food, want to learn more about your favorite recipes, or even learn about cooking, fitness, culture, and nutrition, Spoony Radio is your station. You can tune into Chef Patrick's Food Biz Pro. Chef Patrick has had me on as a guest before. We talked about Arizona cuisine and the death of the diners on the East Coast, which we both mourn deeply. And He will entertain you and inform you about all things food. That's on www.spoonie.com. That's Mojo 50's sister station, Spoonie Radio.
And who doesn't like food?
Who doesn't?
I want to check that out.
I like food a little too much, but
I too have earned that affliction in life. I recall very fondly us visiting many of the diners along the New Jersey Turnpike, the Garden State Parkway, and the good old Route 1. I remember the Rio Diner, the Menlo Park Diner, the
Galaxy Diner.
The Galaxy Diner. God, that takes me back. The one in West Carteret, I think they renamed it 6 times in the time that I lived there. I think the last one was
It was always called the Carteret Diner.
Yeah.
In different ways, shapes, or forms.
Because, a different Greek guy bought it that year and decided to name it and brand it something different. But it was the same 5 waitresses. Go figure that out.
It was owned by the Liberatio family for quite a long time.
It was owned by the Liberatios, actually. I think the Liberatios employed my mother for a little while there at the beginning back.
Wasn't it at the bar downstairs, Butch's place or something?
I think no, she worked at Bridges next door for a little while there.
Yeah, which used to be Bogies.
Used to be Bogies, and then became Bridges, and then I don't even know if that building's there anymore.
Well, we haven't been back for quite a while.
No. But hey, anybody listening back in Carteret, I know Nick listens in sometimes. I went to high school with him, but he works for a warehouse of a major internet product distributor, so he has to hide his political inclinations, keep them quite close to the vest, but he is a massive 2A supporter, and he loves going out to Pensy to fire off his various and sundry firearms.
I apologize for scratching a lot on your show. I've got eczema.
Oh, no worries, man. No worries.
There's dogs that inhabit this place.
Yes, I do have dogs. I have 3 of them. Ooh. Yeah, I have a German Shepherd Catahoula mix. A lot of people say Catawata, And I also have an unidentified German Shepherd mix and a Jack Russell Dachshund.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not a fiend. I've just got a skin condition.
Yeah, it's all right. Hey, I'm allergic to literally everything in this state. I mean, I go outside and I cut my lawn and I come out with hives all over the place. So, speaking of, of ailments and such, if you haven't been on Mojo 50 shop, we're actually offering CBD oil now. I mean, that's kind of crazy. It's on Mojo 50 shop. So that's mojo50.com/shop. You can check that out and use promo code MATT on that one, and you can actually save yourself some money on that. I think it's like $15 off. So if you do have the need for CBD oil in your life, this is made by the same people who actually brought us Atrantil, the dietary supplement, lovemytummy.com/mojo. That's like 5 live reads in one, man. I gotta get credit for that. But yeah, we do offer the KBD CBD tinctures on there. It even comes in cinnamon, which is that some kind of bastardization of cinnamon and mint at the same time?
I don't
know if that would smell good or taste good or what. I don't know. Do you eat this stuff? Do you
even feel
rub it on you or what?
What was the last name you said?
It's cinnamon.
No. The brand name.
Oh, KBD, CBD oil, and it's made by the people who give us Atrantil, which is a dietary supplement.
Atrantil sounds like a fancy French woman.
Yeah, it does sound like a fancy French woman. I'm gonna have to use that for later plugs. I mean, they say
fancy French wine.
Yeah. They say feel free to make fun of the name, and we do at length and ad nauseum. So, really wanted to, I really had to hit on this because I don't know if you guys keep up on British news at all, but one of the unique aspects that I bring to Mojo 50 is I don't just concentrate on, U.S. news and such. I'm also trying to keep a good pulse on the Brexit situation and our distant cousins across the pond. So we're going to shoot across the pond real quick. We're going to talk about Boris Johnson. This video will get demonetized and copyright claim. So, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt are apparently in a runoff for UK Prime Minister right now because if you haven't kept up, Theresa May
tanked because couldn't get a Brexit deal.
Totally screwed it over. And the reason that she couldn't get a deal is because she basically walked up to the EU and, figuratively speaking, dropped trow and said, I'll take what you guys give me. And put all of her cards on the table and immediately took a no-deal Brexit off the table, which is the only bargaining chip that she had, was threatening to basically hatchet the UK's involvement with the EU.
Which is what the people voted for.
It's what the people voted for. It's what would arguably be the best solution for Britain at this point. So it's coming down to now, instead of a general election in the UK, it's coming down to Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt doing a runoff in the Conservative Party. And the question is, who's going to be able to deliver the actual Brexit that the people voted for?
Or are they going to be able to deliver a Brexit, because Parliament, the powers that be, want to keep going with the EU.
Well, the fun thing is Boris Johnson has actually threatened that he would prorogue Parliament, so he would dismiss Parliament just long enough where the drop-dead deadline for Brexit would pass and Britain would crash out of the EU.
Now, again, I am a bit maybe ignorant to this subject. Can you give me a brief summary of Brexit?
Brief summary is that the European Union was an experiment in a supranational federation which was cooked up back in the days following World War II as a solution for Europe to never go to war again. It started out as initially an economic cooperative unit, which was the European zone, or the Eurozone, which was an area of free trade and cooperation. Then they brought in military cooperation, common laws in between the different nations, a customs union which eliminated border controls between the countries of Europe, and it eventually became this amorphous, grasping, clawing, federalized entity. And the really disturbing part about it is there is an MEP, or members of European Parliament, a European Parliament that is elected by the people, ostensibly. Now everybody kind of likens this to the U.S. Congress, where you have a House and a Senate, but you don't. You have the European Parliament, which rubber stamps the decisions that are made by the Executive Council of the European Union, which is an unelected body. This is a body that the people of Europe have no say in appointing. So basically, they're the power brokers of Europe. The European Parliament rubber stamps whatever they ram through, and it is a body that is transforming Europe into really a bastardized version of the Soviet Union.
Tell them where the council sits.
The council sits in Brussels.
Okay, so now we have the muscles from Brussels. Forgive the pun, because that's what Arnold Schwarzenegger used to be called. But yes,
the muscles from Brussels,
yeah.
Despite the fact that the guy was from Austria.
Yes.
So,
but anyway, just think about it this way: it is akin to California and New York running the United States.
Which, by the way, we're getting very close to with the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, but that's a can of worms for another conversation. We might hit that before the end of the show today. But long story short, the people of Britain were not very satisfied with the arrangement. They were dealing with a lot of uncontrolled immigration from the parts of Europe that are not as economically developed. The Eastern European countries, Czech Republic and Slovakia, they broke up.
Yeah.
Poland, Ukraine, Hungary, areas that are more economically disadvantaged, flooded into Britain. And then you have that intensified and worsened by the migrant refugee problem coming out of the Middle East, where this endless stream of refugees is coming from countries like Syria, coming from countries like Iraq, and then coming over the Mediterranean from Northern Africa, from Libya, from the Sudan. And the EU's policy is open doors. Let them all in. Regardless of the increase in crime that they bring, the massive culture shock that's involved from an ultra-liberal Europe, where do what you feel, do whatever feels good, sexual libertinism, the complete absence of religion. Now you're taking people that are extremely orthodox, as Dad mentioned before, 4th century mindset, often Islamists, and there's an important difference between someone who is an adherent of Islam, a Muslim, and an Islamist. An Islamist is actually a person who believes in a political form of Islam, the full enforcement of the Sharia law, where women are subservient, where punishments are incredibly harsh for theft and other issues,
off of hands.
where
Ooh, sounds
And it's to the point where in Europe, gang rapes were becoming common, where roving gangs of these migrants would attack European women, who they viewed as being overly promiscuous just due to the fact that their face was showing.
Also, don't have any sources. I've heard whispers, a couple, say, months ago about acid attacks in Britain.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Acid attacks have occurred in Britain, have occurred in Germany, have occurred in Italy, have occurred in France. There's the no-go zones that exist where the European French police forces or German police forces won't go unless they go in force, like full tactical. Basically, like LAPD won't walk into Watts unless they bring a tank with them. That kind of stuff. And this is what Britain was rejecting when Britain voted for the Brexit. They said, we don't want this. We don't want to become this. Because up until that point, the English Channel had largely buffered them and protected them. But then the EU, especially the Executive Council, started leaning on Britain because Britain is the 5th largest economy in the world, the 2nd largest economy in the EU, that they needed to start taking on their fair share.
And this has only started since
About 2006.
flood of immigration.
2015, 2016. When you had the flood of migrants, and that's what really tipped off the Brexit process. Britons were already very, very upset with the layout of the payments that went to the EU, with the way the tariffs were working, which were typically not in their favor. The trade agreements were typically tipped toward France or toward Netherlands. Yes, it was a one-sided deal. Britain was not getting the benefit of it, and Britain was in fact being strong-armed into giving up their currency, because unlike other members of the EU, Britain kept their own currency. They kept the British pound for a good long time
Instead of the
euro. Now both are used there with pretty much parity, but the pound still exists, and that's something that grinds the gears of the power brokers in Brussels, because the pound is still very strong in monetary terms, stronger than the euro. And that provided Britain with the unique opportunity to leave and survive. Because you take like Italy. Italy's lira currency was in the crapper before the formation of the EU. So when they joined the EU, switching to the euro was not a big deal. We just switch it to the euro, and I still get paid to nothing.
Greece was right behind him.
Greece was right behind him, except you retire there at age 35. And then live off the government dole until you drop dead at age 46. Olive oil does not make you live that much longer, I'm sorry. Especially not when you're eating it in that quantity.
But it tastes so good.
But I digress with cracking on the Greeks. No, I love Greeks. Like I said, I grew up in Jersey. I went to diners my whole life. I mean, souvlaki and tzatziki sauce practically run through my veins.
You ever drink oil? It's delicious.
I actually have drank olive oil before, believe it or not, especially some of the flavor.
Oil.
No, I regret that decision immediately, didn't you?
Yeah. Chunks in the tub.
Although might be the smoothest you'd ever take in your life.
No. It came upwards.
Oh.
Poor kid.
Not nice.
Oh, bad.
But anyway, so Boris Johnson, former mayor of London, and really one of the most right-wingers in all of Britain. He's arguably the Donald Trump of Britain. I'll tilt my monitor so you can see, even down to the hair, with the bad flyaway hair.
That is a rough-looking man.
That's a rough-looking dude.
If I recall, Donald Trump didn't support Boris.
Donald Trump did not support Boris Johnson, especially at first. They were loggerheads, but now that Theresa May has just made such a horrible mess of things, I think Boris Johnson might be the man for the job. And, you know, I had to eat my words, because at the beginning, Theresa May seemed like she was going to be all badass fire and brimstone, and then she turned around and just screwed it up completely. I looked at her and her talking points and said, you know, we might have the next Iron Lady. You know, we might have somebody cut from the same cloth as Margaret Thatcher here. And, man, that did not age well.
An Iron Maiden, you might say?
Hang on, where's my... Gotta get the rim shot to that. An Iron Maiden.
Pull that one out, my
That's
ass.
terrible.
That's
Terrible.
what I'm known for.
Well,
So-
Theresa May is a product of the parliamentary system. I mean, you know, even though conservative to a point, was still part of that parliamentary realm, where she was going to go with what the higher ups in the EU and the higher ups in Parliament were pushing for, instead of listening to the people. See, this is the problem with most, not just European governments, but our government too, is that they don't listen to the people. I mean, the people said in huge numbers that they wanted to repeal and replace Obamacare. Okay? And no one in Congress, Senate or House, would take it up. I mean, they did a lot of show votes, you know, when they knew that they couldn't do anything, and then when it counted, they just done.
They just ran away from it.
Yep.
So, one story that I pulled up, and that kind of puts a period on the end of the sentence, of how bad things can get. Have you heard at all, either of you, about the events happening in China with a group of people? They're called the Uigurs.
Yes, the Uigurs. Yeah.
The Uigurs. They're not Uigurs.
Yeah.
Uigurs. Or Uigurs. I've also heard them referred
Sounds like
to
a
as.
kid I know that raps on the bus.
Like a native. Anyway.
That's a true story.
There's reports coming out of the BBC right now. And, Dad, you might remember from back in the Gulf War days, CNN's initial coverage of the Gulf War, when they were invited into Kuwait, when no other platform was at that time. But they had this tightly controlled, pre-scripted story that the Iraqi Ministry of Information pretty much spoon-fed them and made them report. You remember, it was their response to the babies on floors thing, you know, the incubators controversy. Yeah. So CNN went in because they had to, because it was newsworthy, even though they knew it was bullshit. And they became the story when they got back to Baghdad after that episode touring. Have a story came out from the BBC, which I don't know why I can't find the damn link now, but my Google's pissing me off. But this story from the BBC, and I'll provide a link in the description, is that the re-education camps for the Uigurs, the BBC was invited in. And if you read this story, it's one of the creepiest things I've ever read in my life. And they have some images on there of people that are dead inside. I mean, you look in their eyes and there's just nothing there. And they talk about how they had extremist thoughts and they were brought in by the state. And they're so glad that they were brought in by the state and that they volunteered to be there. And that the Chinese state is making them better, making them realize that their Muslim faith was wrong and that the only faith they should have should be in the state and should be in the power of the government. If you ever have any doubt about the type of horrors that a authoritarian government can inflict on its people, it's completely erased in this. And I really do feel for the BBC reporter who actually had to cover this, because they say at the front of the story that they knew this was a real dilemma of reportage. They knew that they had to go in and cover the story because it was so newsworthy, because nobody had ever been invited into one of these re-education centers before, but they knew everything they saw there was going to be pre-orchestrated, planned, caricatured bullshit propaganda brought to them by Beijing.
If you look at this, you find the same things as Stalinist and Leninist Russia. I mean, this it goes back to the Communist Manifesto. I mean, you provide the narrative, and you say it enough time and say it with enough conviction, say the lie over and over again, the lie becomes the truth. I mean, there is no difference. I mean, you look at the genocides and the internment camps and the gulags, and you can go back through Soviet Russia, Vietnam, Pol Pot, all of these places that China especially. Now they're the only ones that have partially communist, socialist, partially capitalist, because they figured out that they needed to feed the wolf. So how do you feed the wolf? Well, you got to have part capitalist, part communist. But the only people that enjoy the capitalist side of it are the elites.
And socialism works extremely well until you run out of other people's money.
That's right.
So these Uigurs are Chinese practicing...
They're Chinese Muslims.
Chinese Muslims.
Because in the very early, I want to say, 7th or 8th century, China began to be penetrated by other religious expressions such as Islam, Christianity, Buddhism came up from India and began to spread throughout the Chinese population. And then, as now, the Chinese government, then I believe the Qing dynasty at that time, Qing, not King like King, cracked down hard and eradicated Christianity in China for all intent and purpose for almost 1,000 years. They wiped out the Christians. You can find graves of Christians in the territory that the Uigurs currently occupy that are 1,000 years old, and then no crosses anywhere to be found for another 1,000 years until shortly before the Communist Revolution, and then no more crosses after that as well.
Chinese emperors are famous for suppression. I mean, when you look at, and there are northern places in northern India where you have people that are Mongoloid because it's right there on the border, and you have a lot of a lot of people entering, and vice versa,
intermarriage and
intermarriage
interbreeding
and stuff like that, and it's actually quite there's a lot of racism that happens on both sides of that coin, from the Mongoloid in the Indian sections, and from the Indian in the Chinese.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really, when you look at these different governmental and social structures and religious structures that have been around for hundreds and thousands of years, you find out that it's all of that stuff is done at the point of a sword, the point of an arrow, or the barrel of a gun.
Isn't
Mao Zedong said political power flows from the barrel of a gun.
Yep.
Isn't Emperor Qin that drank mercury because some guy said it'd be a good idea?
Oh yeah, they did some stupid things too. Some enormously stupid things. You want to look up some enormously stupid Chinese history? Look up a guy by the name of Pu Yi. He was the last Chinese emperor, the last king emperor, because he was propped up by the Japanese to rule over Manchukuo in the early 1940s, right when the war was coming to an end. And they said, "Oh yeah, no, we're going to give you the throne back." No, he was a puppet king, and they kept him in seclusion and in ignorance, and became one of the most laughable figures in his country's history.
And just think, his first name is Pooh.
I don't know if that's bell-worthy, but I did it anyway. I don't know if that counts, but I did it anyway. But anyway, as predicted, this show again went completely off the rails. And speaking of off the rails, if you're listening to this on Sunday, next up you're going to hear Whiskey 6 Off Track with Whiskey 6 and the gang. They're based out of Tucson, Arizona, so I want to give my fellow Arizonans some love. If you're listening to this on Saturday, immediately following this, you have the Big Sarge Show. It's been great having my dad and my brother on the show for the first time. Hopefully it won't be the last. If I can get them to be dragged into a chair and talk politics in the wee strange hours of the night, then we'll do this again sometime. But until then, folks, this has been the HollowNet on the mighty Mojo 50, coming to you from beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. As always, I say to you now, good night, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. End transmission.